Okay, so really would love, not questions are fine, but dialogue's fine too. So, yes.
Just to follow up on Congressman Edwards' remarks, what you were saying, Congressman, sounded a little bit like what was in the book, The Broken Branch. I guess the observation that Congress has been passive, way too passive relative to the executive branch has been, I think it's, as I've heard it articulated, it sort of extends beyond just the unfortunate years of the Bush administration and something that's been kind of escalating over the decades. And I'm wondering whether you think this is some kind of a fundamental institutional, maybe constitutional problem in terms of the way the powers are allocated among the branches, and just what there is really to do about it other than just observe that it's the case.
Now, I don't know that this has been such a long-standing thing. I would date it back probably to the Gingrich years. Basically what happened was, at least in my party, I was the Republican. Thank you for not sharing that. During that period, Republicans who had been in the minority and without power and were feeling very upset about it began to think of themselves primarily as Republicans. And I can tell you that the Democrats who were controlling the Congress when I was there, the John Dingles, who are still there, would never think to acquiesce to a president of the United States. They're more inclined to say, isn't this nice? You've got a nice office. You've got your own helicopter. You're more important than a city clerk. But we're the Congress. And I think that was the more common view among, Dan Rostenkowski would have been the same way. Tip would have been the same way. And I think it's more recent than that partisanship has begun to trump principle, trump the Constitution. One of the things that bothered me when I was there in my party was that we fell in love, our party fell in love with two concepts that they thought would cure cancer, I suppose. I mean, the most important. One was term limits and one was line item veto. And of course, they were the two dumbest ideas that I'd ever heard. But I said, the only problem here is they're unconstitutional. They're unconstitutional. And the members would come back and say, well, if that's the case, the courts will take care of it. But this is the policy we want. So there has been a period here of a gradual erosion in the sense of having an obligation to do things under a constitutional model. And I think if you go back far enough, say, when I was elected, I don't think that would have been the case.
Yeah, Peter.
I have two questions. One is, Mickey, just to comment, Mickey, I think that if you have one party in the presidency and the other in the Congress, there's less reluctance on the part of the Congress to get after the executive branch, and indeed, some of us, even in both directions, might think sometimes it's excessive, and that's part of the problem here is having a solution that's going to work for all combinations of who's in power at the two ends of the street. But my two questions are, number one, none of you addressed, at least in this round so far, the question of the legitimate needs of national security. In terms of the executive branch protecting information. Emily, you made some reference to things that are shared on a secret basis, and indeed that was Mickey's story, which we all know in terms of the earlier years of this decade. But surely there are some real national security needs where there ought to be some basis, whether you call it executive privilege or whatever you call it, that certain things the executive can hold to itself, or perhaps only share with certain key members of Congress. So I'd like to know what people think about that. The second is your bill, and I look forward to reading it in detail. But I take it that the members of the panel are familiar with it, and I'd just be interested in what they think about the sense, the good sense, the merits of your bill, and also its political prospects.
So why don't we take your first question first? And on the national security, I'd like to start and then have other people jump in. Of course, there are some things that should be secret, but we've let that observation spread so far. The words national security are so loose that they can be applied really cavalierly and are applied cavalierly. The other thing is, I thought Nick Katzenbach, I'm right now actually starting to write a book on secrecy and have started doing some research on it. And Nick, who'd been Attorney General and in Kennedy Johnson and then Deputy Secretary of State, wrote an article in 1973 where he said, we really need to distinguish between the initial decision and implementation of the decision. And as far as the initial decisions go, his conclusion based on his experience was they almost never should be secret. You should come out to the American public and the Congress and say, here are the difficult choices we're facing on whether to expand our forces in Vietnam, for example, which I think he was thinking about a lot. And those should be debated, because if they're not, you're bound to get in the future less support for the policy, and then if it doesn't go well, increase in cynicism. If you make a decision on the basis of a more open process, then the details of how it's carried out may be more defensible. But comments on the issue of, quotes, national security. Brad?
Yes, there are some decisions or some information that should not be public. But the executive branch, at least the Bush administration, was very much inclined to try to insulate from discovery by members of Congress vastly more information than really needed to be kept secret. Every member of Congress has a top secret clearance. It is bestowed upon us by the voters, not by the usual procedures. So the FBI did not have to come around and ask my neighbors about me. There is nothing above top secret. There is no tippy top secret. It's just top secret. But as a practical matter, there are kind of gradations within the Congress. But we are all supposed to be capable or cleared to have any information. There are things Congress can do about it. I agree with what Mickey Edwards said in his opening remarks. Congress has powers that we have not exercised. I'm chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee for the Science and Technology Committee. We heard about a data mining computer program that the FBI was developing. They were getting $20 million a year to develop it. And it supposedly was going to have like 6 units of information. And no one seemed to know what the unit meant. Was it big? Was it little? What's in the unit? And we sent a letter and asked that they provide that information to the GAO, Government Accountability Office. They've got the resources to get secret information, classified information, all the time. And the FBI said, no, this is national security. Congress can't have it. So I wrote to Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Obey, suggested that maybe we should not fund something if we weren't finding, if we didn't know what they were doing with the information, what they were doing, what safeguards they were putting in place, all the rest. And by God, he did. And then we got a call from the FBI. And they decided that maybe there was a way to let us know some of that information after all.